There's a strange kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from working too much. It comes from not being able to stop. You tell yourself you'll just finish one more thing, check one more email, organize one more detail. And somehow, hours pass. Your body is tired, your mind is foggy, but you still can't step away. If you've ever felt that quiet pressure to keep going even when there's no real reason to, then this video is going to explain something about you that most people completely misunderstand. And if you want more content that helps you understand how your mind actually works, make sure to subscribe. On the surface, people like this look disciplined, focused, driven. They're the ones who stay late, who always seem busy, who rarely disconnect. From the outside, it's easy to admire that. It looks like ambition. It looks like control. But if you pay closer attention, something feels slightly off. Because this isn't just about working hard when necessary, it's about working when you don't need to. It's about feeling uncomfortable when you're not doing something. It's about sitting still and immediately feeling like you're falling behind, even when nothing is actually happening. And that's where things start to shift. Because what looks like discipline is not always discipline. In many cases, it's something closer to compulsion. Not the kind that's obvious or dramatic, but a quiet, internal pressure that keeps pushing you forward. It doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like you have to, even when you're exhausted, even when there's no deadline, even when part of you knows you should stop. Psychology has a name for this pattern. It's called workaholism. And despite how normal it has become in modern culture, it's not just loving your work. It's not the same as being engaged or passionate. The key difference is subtle but important. People who are truly engaged with their work can step away from it. They can rest without feeling guilty. Their work gives them energy, but people who are trapped in this cycle don't experience it that way. Their work drains them, but stopping feels even worse. So the question is, why? Why would someone continue doing something that exhausts them without a clear external reason? Why does stopping feel uncomfortable, almost threatening? Part of the answer starts in the way your brain processes reward. Not just reward itself, but the anticipation of it. There's a system in your brain, deeply connected to motivation, that uses dopamine to push you toward action. It's not just about pleasure, it's about movement. It's about the feeling that something important is about to happen, that something needs to be done. And when this system is active, it doesn't ask whether you should act. It simply makes action feel necessary. In everyday life, this system is useful. It helps you focus, complete tasks, stay alert. But under certain conditions, especially when stress becomes constant, this system starts to change. It becomes less about responding to real demands and more about maintaining a state of constant activity. That's when something subtle begins to happen. You stop working because you need to, and start working because stopping feels wrong. And most people never notice the moment this shift occurs. At first, it feels productive. You get more done. You feel ahead. There's even a quiet sense of control that comes from always being in motion. But over time, something begins to change in the background. The same work that once gave you a sense of progress starts to feel flat. You finish something, and instead of relief, there's just a brief pause before the next task pulls you in again. It's subtle, but important, because it suggests that the reward system isn't working the way it used to. Research into how the brain processes reward shows that this system depends on balance. There are structures that increase activation, pushing you toward action, and others that reduce it, allowing you to rest and recover. When everything is working well, you move between effort and recovery naturally. You act when needed, and you stop when it makes sense. But when stress becomes constant, especially unpredictable or long-term stress, this balance begins to break down. Instead of cycling between activation and rest, the brain adapts, and not in a way that feels good. Over time, it can actually reduce the baseline level of dopamine activity. Not completely, but enough to change how you experience things. This is sometimes linked to a state called anhedonia, where the ability to feel satisfaction becomes weaker. Things don't feel as rewarding as they used to. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When the brain starts producing less of that sense of reward, it doesn't just shut down motivation. In many cases, it does the opposite. It pushes you to seek more activity, more input, more tasks. Because somewhere in that loop, it's trying to recover that missing sense of completion or satisfaction. So you work more. Not necessarily because you want to achieve something specific, but because staying still feels empty, and that emptiness is uncomfortable. This is one of the reasons why people in this pattern often say they feel restless when they're not working. It's not just a habit. It's not just discipline. It's a kind of internal imbalance where action feels like the only way to regulate how you feel. But the brain is only part of the story. There's another layer that makes this pattern much stronger and much harder to break. And it has less to do with chemistry and more to do with identity. Because for many people, work is not just something they do, it's something they are. And when that happens, stopping doesn't just feel like taking a break, it feels like losing a part of yourself. When your sense of self becomes tied to what you produce, work stops being just an activity. It becomes a way to measure your value. And not in an abstract way, but in a very immediate emotional sense. You finish something, and for a moment, you feel like you're enough. You're useful. You're moving forward. But that feeling doesn't last long, because it was never really about the task. It was about what the task represents. Psychological research describes this as a self-concept built around individual achievement. In simple terms, your identity becomes anchored in what you accomplish. Your uniqueness, your worth, your place in the world, all of it starts to depend on performance. And when that happens, work becomes more than work. It becomes regulation. It becomes validation. This is why stopping can feel so uncomfortable. It's not just that you're not being productive, it's that, in that moment, you don't have the same proof that you matter. There's no immediate signal telling you that you're doing well, that you're progressing, that you're enough. And the mind doesn't like that kind of uncertainty, so it compensates. It pushes you back into action. You open something, you organize something, you plan something. Anything that restores that sense of movement, because movement feels like control, and control feels safer than stillness. But here's where things become more complex. Because not everyone who works a lot is trapped in this pattern. There's a version of deep work that looks almost identical from the outside, but feels completely different on the inside. Psychology calls this work engagement. And the distinction matters more than most people realize. People who are engaged with their work also invest time and energy. They can be focused for long periods. They can care deeply about what they do. But the experience is different. There's a sense of energy instead of pressure. There's involvement without that constant internal demand. And most importantly, they can step away. They can stop working without feeling like something is wrong. That's the line most people miss, because behavior alone doesn't tell you what's really happening. Two people can have the same schedule, the same workload, the same level of output, and be driven by completely different psychological forces. One is choosing to work. The other feels like they have to. And that difference doesn't just affect how they feel in the moment. Over time, it leads to very different outcomes. Long-term studies show that this compulsive form of work investment is linked to an increase in actual working hours, a growing sense of overload, and a higher risk of depression. Not immediately, not in a dramatic way, but gradually. The person keeps functioning, keeps producing, keeps showing up. But internally, something starts to wear down, because the system they're relying on isn't sustainable. It depends on constant output to maintain a sense of stability, and that creates a loop that's hard to exit. Work gives you a temporary sense of relief, but it also reinforces the idea that you need it to feel okay. And that's where the pattern becomes self-perpetuating. And this is the part most people never stop to question. Because from the outside, everything still looks functional. You're getting things done. You're meeting expectations. You're even being praised for it. So there's no obvious reason to think something is wrong. But internally, the experience is very different. The sense of pressure doesn't go away. The need to keep moving doesn't slow down. And rest starts to feel less like recovery and more like a problem. But here's something important to understand. Not everyone who struggles to stop working is driven by the exact same mechanism. This is where the topic becomes more nuanced. In some cases, the behavior is strongly linked to identity. Work becomes the main source of self-worth. In others, it's more connected to stress regulation. The person isn't necessarily trying to prove something about themselves. They're trying to manage an internal state. Staying busy keeps certain thoughts away. It fills silence. It reduces discomfort. It creates structure in a mind that doesn't feel stable when things are quiet. And sometimes both mechanisms are present at the same time. That's why simple explanations don't work here. Saying, "they just love working," misses the point. Saying, "they're addicted," without understanding why also oversimplifies it. Because the same behavior can emerge from different psychological roots, and if you don't recognize that, you can't really understand what's happening. But if you zoom out, there's a deeper pattern connecting all of this. For many people, work slowly becomes the primary way they regulate how they feel, how they see themselves, and how they relate to the world. It organizes their day, their thoughts, their sense of direction. And over time, other sources of meaning or satisfaction start to fade into the background. Not because they're gone, but because they're no longer being activated in the same way. And this is where the earlier point about the brain becomes critical again. When the reward system is under strain, especially under chronic stress, the ability to feel satisfaction from simple things decreases. Conversations feel less engaging. Rest feels less rewarding. Even activities that used to bring pleasure don't land the same way. So naturally, the mind gravitates toward what still produces a sense of structure and movement. Work becomes the safest option. Not necessarily the most fulfilling, but the most reliable. And over time, this creates a kind of narrowing. Life starts to orbit around productivity, not because that was the original goal, but because it became the most stable way to function. So when you ask why some people can't stop working, the answer is not just that they're driven, or disciplined, or ambitious. In many cases, it's because work is doing more for them than it appears. It's regulating their emotions. It's supporting their identity. It's compensating for a reward system that isn't responding the same way anymore. And once a behavior starts carrying that much weight, stopping it is no longer simple. It's not just about taking a break. It's about stepping away from something that, in a quiet and often invisible way, has been holding everything together. So if any part of this felt familiar to you, not as a judgment, but as recognition, that matters. Because understanding the pattern is the first step to seeing it clearly. And if you want more videos that break down human behavior in a way that actually makes sense, subscribe to the channel.